The shop window was illuminated as if it held something sacred. It was the only point of light on that narrow street in the old city center, where the street lights no longer worked properly, and the cracked sidewalks held puddles from the afternoon rain. The dress was long, the color of wet sand with a fabric that seemed to breathe under the yellowish light. It wasn't extravagant. It had no embroidery or artificial shine. It was simply beautiful in a way that hurt, like certain things that exist only to remind us of what we cannot have. Clara stopped in front of the shop window, as she did every night on her way from the bus stop to the small room she rented at the back of a house in Jardim das Acacias. She clutched a faux leather bag, worn at the edges, and carried on her shoulders the invisible weight of a whole day standing behind a bakery counter, smiling at people who never looked back. The smell of bread and grease still clung to her hair, which she kept tied in a tight bun, not for style, but because her job required it. Her shoes were the same ones she'd worn for 2 years. Her coat was inherited from a cousin who had traveled and never returned. And the dress there, on the other side of the glass, was everything Clara wasn't, but secretly longed to be. She didn't touch the glass. She stayed a step away, as if respecting an invisible boundary between the world of beautiful things and the world where she existed. Sometimes she tilted her head, imagining how the fabric would fall over her shoulders. Other times she just stood there, feeling the cold on her fingers and the heat in her eyes. She never cried. Clara had forgotten how to cry over things that didn't depend on her, but her throat tightened, and that was enough. Nobody knew about that ritual. Nobody asked. Clara had lived alone since she was 17, when her mother moved to the countryside with a man who didn't like stepdaughters. She never knew her father. He had an older sister, Renata, who married young and lived on the other side of town, in a better neighborhood, a life that seemed to belong to another planet. Renata called occasionally, always in a hurry, always with the tone of someone fulfilling an obligation. "Is everything all right, Clara?" "Yes." "Oh, aye." And the silence between them was more genuine than any words. At the bakery, Clara was the first employee to arrive and the last to leave. She cleaned the tables without complaining, served customers with a gentleness that no one noticed, and endured the rudeness of the owner, Mr. Agenor, a short, pot-bellied man who shouted as easily as he breathed. "Clara, the coffee's weak." "Clara, this display case is dirty." "Clara, do you think I pay you to just daydream?" She lowered her head and went back to work, not out of cowardice, out of necessity. That salary paid the rent, the electricity bill, and the rice and beans she ate alone every night, sitting on the edge of her bed, with the plate resting on her lap and her cell phone playing videos she didn't even really watch. It was a life without explicit cruelty, but also without any kind of kindness. No one hit her, no one offended her with harsh words. What they did was worse. They pretended she didn't exist. In that city, Clara was transparent, a functional presence. The girl from the bakery, the one who lives alone, the one who has no one. One night, while standing in front of the shop window, she noticed someone watching her. It wasn't just any look. It was a man sitting on a wooden bench across the street, leaning against the backrest with his legs crossed and an open notebook on his lap. He wore a dark coat, had slightly disheveled hair, and a face she couldn't quite make out in the dim light of the broken lamppost. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Clara did. She lowered her head, clutched her bag, and kept walking. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something she couldn't name. The strange surprise of being seen. The next day, he was there again. Same bench, same notebook, same silence. And Clara, without understanding why, also stopped again in front of the shop window, pretending to look at the dress, but feeling his eyes as a physical presence. This time, he raised his hand in a brief gesture, almost a wave, almost an apology for being there. Clara didn't answer. She went into the side street and disappeared. This went on for a week. Every night, at the same time, the two occupied their places like actors in a wordless play. He on the bench, she in front of the window, the dress between them as a kind of silent pretext. Until one Friday, when the wind was colder and the streets emptier, he got up, crossed the street, and stopped beside her. Not too close. Close enough. "You come here every night," he said, without asking a question. Clara glanced at him sideways. Up close he was younger than he looked. He had dark, deep-set eyes, as if they carried an old weariness, and large hands that held the notebook with delicate firmness. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't seem threatening either. He just seemed like someone who also knew loneliness. "I like to look," Clara replied, almost voicelessly. "The dress? A showcase." He was silent for a moment, looking at the sand-colored fabric as if trying to understand what she saw there. Then he said, in a low voice, "I draw the people who stop here. This street has good lighting at night. But you're the only one who comes back every day." Clara felt her face flush. Not from vanity, but from shame. The idea of being watched in her most vulnerable moments made her want to disappear. She took a step back, but he opened the notebook and showed her a page. There, in the graphite, was her. Not exactly her. A softer, more luminous version with the same tied-back hair and the same worn bag, but with something in her eyes that Clara had never seen in herself. A dignity, a quiet beauty. "You drew me," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me want to draw," he replied. His name was Rafael. He was 32 years old and worked as a restorer of antique furniture in a workshop near the river. He lived alone in a rented 2-story house, surrounded by wood, sandpaper, and the smell of varnish. He had no family nearby. His mother had died when he was young, and his father lived in the countryside, in a silence that was less loneliness and more resignation. Rafael had been drawing since childhood, but he had never shown his drawings to anyone. Not out of fear of judgment, but out of a strange conviction that what he did was too intimate to be exposed. Clara didn't know what to do with his attention. She was suspicious. Not out of malice, but because life had taught her that no one offers anything without wanting something in return. When Rafael suggested they have coffee, she refused. When he appeared the following night with a new drawing, her back to the camera, looking at the shop window, her dress reflected in the glass like a golden ghost, she accepted the paper, but didn't say thank you. She put it in her bag and left quickly, as if that gesture were too dangerous to accept in public. At home, sitting on her bed, she carefully unfolded the drawing. She stared at it for a long time. It was the first time in years that someone had seen something in it worth keeping, something worth recording. And that hurt more than any offense, because kindness, when it comes late, comes accompanied by everything we endured without it. The days went by and Clara and Rafael began to talk. Not about big things. About the cold, about the street, about the noises of the city center at night. He told her about the chairs he restored, how he peeled away layers of old paint until he found the original wood, how each piece had a story hidden beneath the surface. Clara listened attentively, and he noticed it. He realized she was truly listening, not just waiting for her turn to speak. Little by little, Clara began to recount pieces of herself. Her departed mother, her distant sister, her job at the bakery, the owner who yelled at her, the salary that barely covered the month. She didn't speak out of self-pity, but with a dry objectivity that was, deep down, the armor she wore to avoid crumbling. Rafael listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without saying that everything would get better. He simply listened. And for Clara, that was revolutionary. One Wednesday night, he asked her why she never came into the store. "Because I know the price," she said. What if price didn't matter? But it matters. For whom? Clara remained silent. She didn't know how to answer. Or perhaps she did, but the answer was too big to fit on that sidewalk. What she didn't say, and perhaps never would, was that the dress wasn't about the dress itself. It was about everything it represented. The possibility of being beautiful without apologizing, of occupying space without apologizing for existing, of looking in the mirror and seeing someone who deserved good things. The dress was a fantasy of dignity. And Clara, who never had the luxury of dreaming big, was content to dream through the glass. One Saturday, Renata called. It was her birthday, and she wanted Clara to come. It'll be a simple thing at home, just family. Clara knew that family meant Renata's husband, her husband's friends, and all those people who looked at Clara as if she were a stain on a beautiful painting. But she accepted, because there was still a girl inside her who wanted to belong, who wanted to be invited, who wanted to sit at the table and feel like she had a place. On the day of the party, Clara wore her best outfit, a plain white blouse and a dark skirt that no longer fit. She tied her hair up, put on some old lipstick, and went. Renata's house was beautiful, full of plants, cushions, and travel photos. The guests laughed loudly, held glasses of wine, and talked about things Clara didn't know: restaurants, TV series, beach vacations. She stayed in a corner holding a glass of juice, smiling when someone looked in her direction, but knowing that no one was really looking. Renata approached once, adjusted the collar of Clara's blouse, and said softly, "You could have dressed up a little more, couldn't you?" She didn't say it out of malice. She said it out of habit, out of that involuntary sense of superiority that arises when one person has more and another has less, and neither of them knows how to deal with it. Clara stayed until the cake. She sang happy birthday in a firm voice, hugged her sister, took a piece of cake wrapped in a napkin, and left. On the bus ride back, looking out the dirty window, she thought that perhaps belonging was something you earn, not something you receive, and that perhaps she'd been waiting too long for something that no one was going to give her. That night, she passed by the shop window and Rafael was there. He looked at her and noticed. He didn't ask what had happened. He just said, "Want to go for a walk?" They walked in silence through streets that Clara knew by heart, but which at that moment seemed different, wider, more breathable. At a certain point, he stopped in front of an old wall covered in moss and took out his notebook. There, quickly, with firm strokes, He sketched Clara's profile under the lamplight. He tore out the page and handed it to her. "That's you," he said. "Not the one others see. The real you." Clara held the paper and felt her throat tighten. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a mirror, but a fairer, more honest, more generous mirror than any she had ever looked into. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt found. The following days were different, not because something big happened, but because something small changed inside her. Clara began to walk with her head held a little higher. At the bakery, when Mr. Agenor shouted that the counter was dirty, she looked him in the eye and said calmly, "I cleaned it 10 minutes ago, Mr. Agenor. You can check." He remained silent, surprised, and didn't shout again that morning. It was little, but it was a start. Rafael invited her to visit the workshop. Clara went on a Sunday morning when the sun streamed through the tall windows and the smell of wood was warm and sweet. The place was full of disassembled chairs, chests of drawers without drawers, tables bearing the marks of time. Rafael showed each piece as if introducing a person. This one came from a house that was demolished. The owner died and the children were going to throw everything away. I took it because I thought it deserved another chance. Clara ran her hand over the wood and felt the grooves, the marks, the history etched into the surface. She understood. Those pieces were like her, discarded, ignored, but with something underneath worth discovering. That afternoon, he drew her again. This time she was sitting at her workbench, a cup of coffee in her hand, her bare feet dangling in the air. Clara smiled as he drew her, a small, restrained smile like a flower bud she wasn't yet sure if it was safe to open. Rafael looked at her over his sketchbook and felt something stir within his chest, a pleasant weight, like an anchor, finally finding its mark. He didn't say he loved her, not yet. He had the prudence of someone who had suffered and learned that words, when spoken too soon, can frighten more than comfort. Instead, he showed it. He showed it in the drawings he made of her, in the coffee he made when she came, in the way he listened to each phrase as if it were precious. And Clara, who had never been treated like this, oscillated between gratitude and fear. Fear of getting used to it, fear of needing it, fear that all of this would be temporary, like all the good things that had passed through her life. One night, as they sat on the bench in front of the shop window, the bench that had once been only his and now belonged to both of them, Clara said something she hadn't planned to say. "I'm afraid you'll leave?" Rafael looked at her. The wind ruffled her hair, which was loose for the first time. He didn't promise he would stay forever. He didn't say she was the woman of his life. He simply said, "I'm here." And that was enough. Not because it was sufficient, but because it was true. And truth, for Clara, was the rarest and most valuable thing in the world. Weeks passed, and the dress was still in the shop window. Clara still stopped to look, but now it was different. She didn't look with hunger, with longing, with that tight desire of someone who wants something unattainable. She looked with a kind of tenderness, as if she were looking at an old friend who had kept her company on the hardest days. The dress had been her silent solace, her small portion of beauty in a world that insisted on being harsh. Now, beauty came from somewhere else. One day, Rafael showed up at the bakery. Clara was startled to see him there, standing in front of the counter with his notebook under his arm and a slight smile on his lips. So Agenor looked at him with his usual suspicion and asked what he wanted. Rafael ordered a coffee and a cheese bread, sat at the corner table, and stayed there all morning drawing. Clara worked, served customers, cleaned, and occasionally glanced at him. Every time their eyes met, she felt something she couldn't describe, a kind of anchoring, as if finally there was someone in the world who knew exactly where she was. At the end of the workday, when Clara took off her apron and let her hair down, Rafael stood up and walked with her to the street. They stopped in front of the shop window, as always, but this time he held her hand. It was a simple gesture, without warning, without ceremony. His fingers, rough from sandpaper and varnish, intertwined with hers, thin and dry from bleach. And there, hand in hand in front of a dress she would never buy, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since childhood, the feeling that someone had chosen to stay. "I want to show you something," said Rafael. He led her to the workshop. In the back, covered with a light cloth, was a chair, not just any chair, a high-backed chair made of dark wood with delicate carvings that looked handmade. Rafael removed the cloth, and Clara saw that something was engraved on the backrest. The outline of a woman in front of a shop window, her hair tied back, and an old bag slung over her shoulder. It was her, carved into the wood, permanent. "I restore things that the world discards," he said, his voice almost inaudible. "But you're the first person who made me want to create something new." Clara touched the wood with her fingertips. She felt the grooves, the curves, the attention to detail. No one had ever done anything like this for her. No one had ever transformed her into art. And there, in that workshop full of dust and light, She understood that the dress in the shop window had never been what she truly wanted. What she wanted was exactly that, to be seen in her entirety, unfiltered, without judgment, without pity. To be chosen not despite who she was, but precisely because of who she was. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she loved him. She just rested her head on his shoulder, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath, like someone who had been holding their breath for years and finally remembered how to breathe. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Clara passed by the shop window and noticed that the dress was no longer there. In its place was a naked mannequin, unclothed, unadorned, without purpose. The store was having a sale, and the dress had been sold to some woman who would probably wear it once and forget about it at the back of her closet. Clara stared at the empty space and felt a strange pang, not of sadness, but of closure, like when you finish a book that has been with you for a long time. That night, when she arrived at Rafael's workshop, she found a package on the workbench. It was simple, made of brown paper and string. She opened it slowly. Inside was a new notebook with a leather cover, and on the first page, a drawing of her smiling, with her hair loose and her feet bare. Below, in small, careful handwriting, he had written, "For Clara, who taught me that the most beautiful things in the world are not in shop windows." She held the notebook against her chest and stood there in the middle of that workshop that smelled of wood and time, feeling the light weight of being loved by someone who didn't want to change her, didn't want to fix her, didn't want her to be more or less than she was. Someone who had found her in front of a window, looking at what she couldn't have, and decided to show her that she already had enough. Rafael appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, hands in his pockets, and that slight smile that Clara now knew by heart. He said nothing. He didn't need to. There was a language between them that dispensed with words, made of shared silences, of graphite drawings, of rough hands that meet in the dark. Clara opened the notebook to a blank page and looked at it. "Teach me how to draw." Rafael laughed, a low, warm laugh, like wood crackling in a fire. "You already know," he said. "There's just never been anyone who held the paper." And there, in that secluded workshop near the river as night fell over the city and the downtown shop windows went dark one by one, two people whom the world had ignored found in each other what they had always sought. Not perfection, not wealth, not anyone's approval. Just the simple and immense certainty that existing alongside someone who truly sees us is the purest form of beauty that life can offer. And the sand-colored dress, wherever it was, no longer mattered. Because Clara had discovered something that no shop window could contain, that a person's true worth is not in what they wear, what they have, or what others say about them. It lies in the silent courage to continue existing, day after day with dignity, even when no one is watching. Except that, on that dark street in the old city center, someone was there. And that changed everything.